And we're back. Welcome back to week 6 of the 12 rules for life analysis. This week we're talking about rule number 6. Set your house in perfect order before you criticize the world. Before we actually get started in talking about the chapter, I think this chapter is probably the one that I believe Dr. Peterson gets the most personal scrutiny for. I don't know if you've ever seen like that meme. It's it's been on Reddit a few times where it shows a picture of like Dr. Peterson in his own house, and like his house looks kind of like a mess. Like there's just like papers lying all about. There's boxes lying open, and there's like a hamper or something. And then and then the caption to that is like, set your house in perfect order before you criticize the world. I think that's kind of funny, if I'm being completely honest. Like, even as a fan, like I can see the humor in that. But at the same time, it's like, what human being doesn't have their bad days,
Yeah. I mean, obviously, because while we're recording this for like the past year and a year and a half, I forget how long it was, he was dealing with all that, like, he was addicted to like benzos, I think.
Yep.
And he's going through all like the withdrawal things. So it's like, obviously, not everyone has all their shit together.
Yeah, I agree. And I think, I feel as though this is one of those instances for me where it's like, that adage where the saying goes something along the lines of, you don't want to meet your heroes or whatever.
Yeah.
For me, it kind of made him seem more real to me as a person, because I mean, it's not like he never talked about his problems, right? Because he's had his problems with like his daughter and her chronic disease. He's had his own problems too with his own like depression, and also things that he's encountered in his own practice. And then also more recently the illness of his wife, and then his subsequent addiction to benzos. And I think, I don't know, it was difficult watching him struggle through all that stuff.
Yeah.
But at the same time, it's also like it's sort of like you were able to see the things that he was espousing like sort of carried out in action, and we're like, someone as great as him, or as someone that I hold in such a high esteem, is still a human being. And there may be instances in his life where he doesn't carry out all these rules to like their fullest, or maximizes like value in every aspect of his life, and that's okay too. I think that it's kind of ironic, because his the people that sort of meme that aspect of him into oblivion claim to be like so compassionate, or so altruistic, or fighting for the little guy, when it's like a person who's struggling with benzos, and you're gonna like kick him when he's down. It's like, come on, man.
Yeah.
A little bit of
Plus,
hypocrisy.
I think part of the reasons for these rules is not you're always following them to their fullest extent. Part of it is, if you follow a lot of these rules, when that stuff does happen and you do go through something that's like crazy difficult, it'll minimize the damage and allow you to bounce back quicker than if you weren't following these like general guidelines. Which, because he's like already back like doing podcasts and stuff. I don't think he's quite. I haven't listened to a while, but I don't think he's quite back to where he was as of this recording. But I've only listened to a few, and I think it's partly him trying to catch up. Because I think the last one, it was a while ago, I listened to, like, was Brett Weinstein, and he was like still hitting all those beats. But I think a normal person wouldn't have bounced back quite as well, and like
Yeah, I agree.
already be doing almost what he was already doing before.
Yeah, I've been trying to keep up more so with his more recent like videos, and also the things that he's been putting out. He's certainly become more prolific, I think. Like, in the sense that he's doing less interviews where he's being interviewed, and he's being more proactive and having other
Yeah.
people on his own podcast. I've noticed for him, and this is just my own perspective too. I could be, what I say isn't always like real or true, but it seems like he's lost a lot of his. I would say maybe it seems like he's lost a little bit of patience. Like, he comes to his conclusions a lot faster now, and perhaps it's because he's been talking about the same things for so long.
Yeah.
But then also at the same time, it's like, when you go through a lot of just shit in your personal life, you kind of just lose patience, or like you lose yeah, you just lose the ability to like just take shit when it's not warranted, or um, any one of those things. But yeah, he's been through a lot, and I remember finding out about that stuff, and it was kind of hard for me to process too, because that guy like helped me out through some pretty hard times in my life. And actually, ironically, this rule is probably the one that is probably most applicable to us right now too. This is probably like my second favorite rule, and
Yeah.
that's because like I feel as though maybe not so much like young men, but just young people in general, especially in the West, we have this tendency of like wanting to take action or like change the system that we find to be like so corrupt or so terrible. When it's like, oh,
Yeah.
we're
Yeah.
only like 25, 26 years old. We've had only like we've only had like that much experience and even less knowledge just based on like whether or not we've like adequately reflected on it. And then it's also like, oh, what do my daily routines look like? Oh, I wake up literally like minutes before I have to go to work. I'll skip days where I don't brush my teeth, or I don't eat all my meals, and sometimes like sometimes I'm just eating fast food like on repeat.
Yeah.
So it's like, what the hell kind of business do I have trying to talk about how corrupt politics is, the political
Yeah.
system is in the West, or you know.
I do think that's why this one, I think, is one of the ones that he gets the most flack from, is because most people want to do that. They're like, oh, like my life isn't perfect, or like everything seems pretty garbage, which, I think it's really easy to quickly go down that rabbit hole. And then people see him just sounding so simplistic or not trying to address all these big issues. And they're like, well, but we got all these big issues to deal with. And he's saying, like, well, hold on, start with something small that you can handle first. Like, are you, you know, working out every day? Like, are you getting up on time? Stuff like that. And they get mad
Yeah.
because I think they think that it's way more important to be part of these big issues or big events than it is to do the little things every day, you know?
Yeah, I agree. One of the quotes that I really like from this chapter is like, if you don't have like your family life straight at home, or like your house is a mess, don't you dare try and like run a city. You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
It's that same thing where it's like, anyone who's like tried to enter the job market too, especially for the first time, it's like, what are the odds of you actually getting your dream job right from the get go, or like being able to work for like the ideal company when you like didn't do anything in undergrad, where you just sat in
Yeah.
classes, maybe you did an internship or two or some research over the summer. It's like you gotta start small, and I think that's sort of the heart of the chapter. I actually love the way the chapter's laid out too, because he not only is he sort of like before he became this personality, he was obviously a clinician, but he was also like a historian too, and I think
Yeah.
his depth of knowledge of history kind of shines through here, because he draws upon a lot of not just literary figures, but also just notorious figures in especially within the past century or two. Like
Yeah.
like my interpretation of like the first half of this chapter is like he says this all the time too in his interviews, where it's like, what happens when you question the nature of being itself, right? Like I love the way he phrases that question, because like when you encounter a problem, there's like two, like there's really two ways you can look at it. It's like, what did the world do to like enable this into this issue to coming into fruition, and then it's also like the other half of it is, what did I do that sort of enabled that in
Yeah.
coming to be. And I feel as though like I'm certainly not exempt from this, but like a lot of people, we don't want to do that. We don't want to do the latter, because it's so much easier to look at something and be like, oh, it's their fault for doing this, or they should have known better. When in actuality, it's like, number one, no. Like, uh, if you were in their position, it's entirely possible that you would have done the same things that they did. And then also number two, it's like, don't think you're so high and mighty too. Like,
Yeah. Especially when it comes to like big complex things. where it's everyone. I feel like this happens a lot, and I think it's becoming a pretty constant meme now. Where, we went through COVID, and the meme was like, "Oh, it looks like everyone's becoming an armchair epidemiologist, or everyone's a armchair virologist or vaccinologist." And then I was seeing this week, the week we're recording this, I think it's been like 2 weeks now, just the crazy stuff that's been going on in Afghanistan, and I just keep seeing this meme floating around where it's like, oh, last week everyone was an armchair virologist, and now everyone's a armchair uh, foreign policy expert, and it's
Yeah,
like
what's
everyone
your
focuses
impression of
so
that?
much for the people thinking.
Yeah, yeah.
I think because even I fall in this trap where I I think the big problem is like no one is humble enough to admit they don't have a well-formed opinion or a good idea of a topic. So,
Mm.
if you went through this rule, if you applied this rule to that situation, no one's done like all the little work of doing like researching the history and doing all the little things you need to become at least well versed, I know like there's a great podcast I keep meaning to listen to about it. Like I think it's called Martyr Made, like about the history of the whole conflict, or like everyone hasn't set their room in order with the little stuff to start criticizing the big movements. I know like with this specific issue, it seems like there's a lot of easy things to criticize, but I still feel like a lot of people, when it comes to big
Mm.
issues, they don't like do the little stuff like I said, or do the background research
Yeah,
and then
definitely.
pretend to be an expert or have a great opinion on it. I feel like that happens a lot,
Yeah.
especially in online discourse where any random person can have a quote unquote well formed, like I should say, not well formed, a strong opinion on something. But then when you start like just picking apart, like just asking questions, you start to realize like, oh, they just don't even know much about this topic at all. Like,
Yeah, because I mean, anytime you have a conversation, especially with people that they only read the headlines of certain articles, or
mm,
they only listen to like the major talking points that you see on like on like a program like CNN or even Fox. They'll pretty much you can pretty much like once they say one thing and it's like one of those buzzwords, you can almost like
yeah,
predict exactly what they're gonna say next, because it's like just so low. It's almost like reading like uh, it's almost like reading a horoscope that's like tinted
mm,
in like the flavor of
yeah,
politics, where the things that they say are like just vague enough for someone to like understand the gist of what's going on. But like if you probe it like even just a little deeper, you poke that topic even just like a bit beyond what they're comfortable with, like these people instantly lash out, or they'll find ways to like attack like your character. It's always like an assault on character first too. And I think a lot of that where that comes from is I agree in the sense that a lot of people are afraid of admitting like the limitations of their like knowledge or their comprehension on an issue. Because I mean, like, I run into this problem all the time whenever it's like election season. Like,
yeah,
people are always talking about like, oh, you better vote, and I'm like, first off, like, it's almost like trying to get into season for like a sport. You know what I mean? It's like, oh
mm,
man, I have to like really like like spend time like conditioning, or like figuring out exactly what like the hot topic issues are. When in actuality, it's like that's like a corner of like the puzzle of like this grand puzzle
yeah,
that's like been an issue for like the past 30 years. And a lot of times I feel as though people are so trigger happy
mm,
when it comes to just entering that conversation, that they start off looking to they listen to people talk with the purpose of answering rather than like listening to understand and listening to like really know what the hell is going on, you know?
yeah.
And that
It's like
that
imagine. Oh, I was gonna say, like, if it's a good metaphor, like imagine you haven't been watching the NFL for like three years, and suddenly you have to like make a bet on who's gonna win the Super Bowl.
yeah, that's a great one.
Like imagine if you put like you had to bet like $10,000. Imagine how much research you would do into that to like make that bet, but people won't do that for like voting at all, you know? Like
Yeah.
imagine the amount of research you would do for like a $10 bet on who would win the Super Bowl versus like a $10,000 bet. And I'm saying like you don't have to waste like hours and hours of time like researching certain topics, but I feel like a lot of people don't even have the baseline knowledge, or they just go to their favorite YouTuber and watch their one video and say, "Okay, this is my opinion on this topic now," when it's
Right.
just regurgitating the same YouTuber who's probably regurgitating another one who's regurgitating a CNN headline. So it's like,
Yeah, and I think a lot of that too comes down to like this idea of appeal to authority too, where
mm,
a lot of times people will just defer like the work of just due diligence to just another person with like a title, or someone who
yeah,
claims to be a professional, or someone who has like let's say a YouTube channel with not only just like a big following, but like let's say their producer is really good and they make really kick-ass videos, or like their editing is really like spot on, you know.
yeah,
And it's like, oh, once you see these like once you see these like secondary like attributes or characteristics of their argument come together, you almost forget like what their core, what like the heart of their argument is to begin with, you know. And then
yeah,
it's like you're suddenly so distracted by like the show and the lights, and you know, maybe like the interviewer is like really cute too or something, you know.
yeah.
And now suddenly
Or
it's like, oh yeah, like I'm all for this thing. What the hell am I even talking about? You know, it's like
yeah,
what was the original reason for me to like get in on this issue? And the crazy thing too is that like everyone expects you to care about everything. You know,
yeah,
it's like, okay, I understand Afghanistan right now, like at the time of our recording, is an issue, but like my understanding and my comprehension of like the geopolitics of the area, or even just like, I'm not saying I don't care about like the people that are going through hard times in that region. You know, it's like it's a terrible thing, and no one should have to go through with it. Go through and experience that. But at the same time, it's like my life would literally not be even a life if I spent all my time like trying to learn every single thing about every single like geopolitical issue that plagues every country. You know what I mean? And it's like,
yeah.
oh, you don't know everything that's going on right now within like this really like war torn region or something that isn't in the United States. How dare you? You know?
Yeah.
It's
It's
just
like I
crazy.
guarantee. Yeah, it's like I guarantee you. I bet you like I haven't looked into it a while ago, but like I feel like Yemen is probably still in a civil war, and like you just don't hear about it, or like
There's
you
a
see like
genocide going on
clips.
in Cuba right now, I'm pretty sure.
Yeah, so there's like yeah, it's like stuff like that where it's like you don't even hear about this, and it's crazy to me. I mean, this is pretty off topic already, but it's crazy to me that like we focus so much on it seems like the one headline of the day for some reason, but there's like so much more going on in the world. Like how much percent of like all the major networks time is like spent on COVID right now when there's still like other crazy stuff happening. Like yeah, COVID and Afghanistan is like super important, but what else is happening
Imagine
that
how
we're just not
different. Yeah, this will be the last thing I say about this issue too before we go back to the chapter. But also
yeah.
imagine how different this response would be if because right now Joe Biden is our president, but imagine how different like the media response would be if this was Donald Trump making these decisions. You know, and
Yeah.
then also seeing like the fallout of it too, like especially in terms of media coverage. I just can't help think you know, people would just be blowing up, and then suddenly like COVID becomes like this small like asterisk at the bottom of the
Mm,
article, you know, because was just such a magnetic personality, and he was just so easy to make headlines off of too, you know. He was like the
yeah.
cash cow of like mainstream media for like 4 years. He still probably is. But anyways, yeah, so back to the thing that we were talking about in this chapter. The first half of this chapter talks about what happens when you question the nature of being itself, and he draws upon like other literary figures too. Like I think the one that I really liked was Leo Tolstoy. And the part about this I really like is how he covers like both sides of the issue. And I'm gonna read this straight from the text. It's on page 149. Leo Tolstoy's reasoning was, in quotes, "My position was terrible. I knew that I could find nothing in the way of rational knowledge except a denial of life. And in faith, I could find nothing except a denial of reason. And this was even more impossible than a denial of life." Yeah, I love that.
Mm,
Because it's like, it kind of shits on both, like, religious zealots and also extreme atheists, because it's like
Yeah.
the solution, or at least my interpretation of the solution that like atheists have sort of posited, is that rational knowledge and conventional science seeks to like provide all the answers for the universe, right? But then his approach here is that like the only logical conclusion here, if you were to just go purely based off of rational knowledge, is that life is meaningless and it deserves to be destroyed. But on the
Yeah.
flip side, it's like, and in faith, I could find nothing except a denial of reason. And it's like a lot of times when you read through religious stories, like you have to suspend a lot of. It's like watching a movie and seeing a guy like fly through the window and then he's like perfectly okay. It's like for that split second you just had to accept that like okay, like the physics of this universe are slightly different.
Yeah. Yeah.
When you're like reading about religion, a lot of rationality has to be like suspended or like put on pause. And I just
Yeah.
love that he was able to address both sides too. And it's like one of those things where the answer to and here he's trying to like provide an answer to like the meaning of life. And it's like maybe the answer, much like other things, lies somewhere in the middle between these two things.
Yeah, I did make note of like I think right after that passage you read is like the list of responses. And I think Tolstoy had the four responses, and I think Jordan Peterson comes up with sort of like the fifth route because Tolstoy's was a childlike ignorance, which I understand is like going back to either faith or whatever you want to say, like before you kind of had this realization, or maybe not realization, this more of thinking that life is meaningless and like all this evil things happen, is like going back to that mindless pleasure, so hedonism, and then dragging out like meaningless and evil, which I keep thinking about it. I think most people, the reason why like all these depression and anxiety rates are all increasing is because I think a lot of people are somewhere around that two,
Mm,
three, and like kind of bouncing back and forth between them. And then four is destruction, which fortunately I think most people never go to four. But I
right.
think if I had to put categorize most people, it's probably two or three. And
Mm,
even if it's not, I guess it is mindless pleasure where I think we're always consuming like Netflix or even like Netflix, YouTube, and HBO, whatever it is, we're always consuming some sort of media to kind of distract ourselves. Even I find this, what I was kind of realizing is even when I think I'm justifying it and I'm trying to like be meaningful and learn something interesting, it's like, oh, I'm just also probably distracting myself from a lot of issues too by watching like a documentary or a YouTube video essay on a complex topic. It's like, oh, I'm probably also, this is just like me rationalizing away that, oh, I'm not watching Netflix. I'm not wasting my time. I'm learning something, which is more, I
mm.
think, still in that kind of two. Um, but I don't know what you think is
Yeah,
like
I
are
actually,
most people.
yeah, I definitely agree with you there. And to sort of, I definitely want to talk about this later because it talks. You touched upon a topic that I also want to discuss, and it also arises later in the chapter. I'm just gonna bring it up right now, just so that we know to come back to it. And it's the thing I wanted to reference is, in his last sort of subsection of this chapter. I think it's on like page 157 in like the hardcover copy. It's like a, let's see, start stopping today. Don't waste time questioning how you know that what you're doing is wrong if you are certain that it is. Inopportune questioning can confuse without enlightening, as well as deflecting you from action. So like when you say that stuff, like that's like exactly what he's talking about here, where it's like sometimes even like fanciful thoughts or you probing like really like seemingly like difficult questions can be a sort of escape too. And and not just that, but like that escape is also necessary. Because if you're always just surrounding yourself with like your inadequacies or constantly looking at yourself and being like, oh wow, like I've got so much work to do on myself, and I have all these things that I have to get done before like X time. I mean, that
Yeah.
can get really overwhelming, and that's pretty much how anxiety is born, you know. So it's not fundamentally a bad thing, and I think I definitely agree with you there. I actually didn't even think of it that way when it comes to like just categorizing people and sort of like a distribution of like where they fall within that four. I also like
Yeah.
how Peterson kind of shits on Tolstoy a little bit. Like you mentioned this too, where he's like he was kind of being childish and he didn't push it far enough, you know.
Mm.
And I think a lot of that was also because like I don't know like Tolstoy's like biography right now. I don't even know if he's still alive. I don't think he is, but if he is, you know, I hope he's doing all right.
Yeah.
But immediately, like after when he says like Tolstoy wasn't pessimistic enough, he starts talking about like the mass murders, um, uh, the incidents at like Columbine, the Colorado theater, all these like terrible things that have happened, and it's like when you see that, because I think Tolstoy said like the ultimate conclusion, like that fourth possibility is just killing yourself. And then
Yeah.
Jordan's like, no, 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 no. It's like you're killing everyone else, and then you're killing yourself. So yeah, I think
As a son,
I think a
I
lot
was
of times like people, maybe not necessarily like people, just are categorized into those zones, but like they spend more time in their life in those zones rather than the other time
mm,
in the other sections. You know what I mean?
yeah, I was gonna say as a side note, Tolstoy died in 2010, or
Oh, okay.
no,
Rest in
sorry,
peace.
1910. He was 18th century. Really?
Oh shit.
Am I looking at the right Tolstoy?
Leo Tolstoy.
Anyways, yeah, I was
Yeah,
gonna
that
say,
makes sense though, because I mean, like even now, like I mean, Jordan spent a lot of his time studying like the 20th century, right? And he also
yeah,
has like a pretty good understanding of like what happened in like these mass murders, as
and
well.
I feel
So it's
like,
like when
yeah,
you look at those things, how can you not come to that conclusion?
especially like Russian. I think he spent a lot of time studying like Russia specifically in the 20th century, which obviously to understand the 20th century, you'll probably need to review a little bit of what happened in the 19th century to make sure, what led up, which, if you've ever listened to Dan Carlin's,
Oh yeah, hardcore
like,
history.
yeah, he always says to start, he's always like, it's always crazy where he starts and for like going back. Or I think Martyr Made did the same thing when I started trying to listen to his history of the Middle East, where he's like, I don't know where to start because it's so crazy for decades. So I'm gonna start like back from what I want to start with. But yeah, that was kind of a tangent. But yeah, I was gonna say, I think the reason why, partly why we might be seeing more of these, no, I think maybe we are seeing more of that four in modern day, or maybe we're just being able to better record it. I'm not sure, but I think we are seeing more, mass shootings, stuff like that, is because more people now have more time to kind of reflect on like the nature of being, kind of this whole first step, because now we don't have to spend 12 hours a day and then just pass out from exhaustion just to survive. Most people now have the time to, oh, I only work 8 hours a day, so that gives me an extra eight to contemplate life.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting theory, and I think that leads like really well into like the next subsection where he's talking about like vengeance or transformation.
Mm,
Um, because a lot of times like when you see these people that have done like just committed terrible violence like on a massive scale, there's almost always like a manifesto that they leave behind after they die, right? And it's like you
yeah,
can't come to these conclusions just from like overnight, like almost like sort of trying to rush like this like 5-paper essay that your teacher signed 3 weeks ago. It's like, nah, like these people have like not only experienced like shit for like a really long time, but they've also had time to reflect on it too. And that's pretty scary because one of those like one of the scariest realizations to me, like that sort of Jordan really likes to talk about too, is that like if you were these people like that were given like dealt the same hand and like were put in the exact same circumstances, it's like very likely. It's almost like entirely true that you'd probably do the exact same things that they did. Because I mean, like
Yeah.
you look at the things that have happened to these people. I think that the greatest example is like Carl Panzram, that he talks about in this chapter, where he's like an arsonist, he's a rapist, he's a serial killer. It's like he was committed to this education system that like brutally violated him. And it's like
Yeah.
I don't even remember when. I remember looking into his story like a while ago, but I don't remember like at what period of time he was actually alive and was doing these things. But I think it was maybe in like the early 20th
Yeah.
century or so. But like even still, it's like if I had to go through all those experiences, I would be really vengeful too. You know, I'm not saying it's
Yeah.
right. You know, like there's the conclusions that he's coming to are not right. Like they're objectively
Yeah.
wrong, and they only beget like terrible violence and just chaos. But I'm not. But I'm also saying like it makes sense to how he came to those conclusions too. If that was all he ever knew, and no one gave a fuck about him, and
Yeah.
yeah, and he was just like, and I think he's even the wallpaper for this chapter, I believe. But yeah, man, it's crazy because like, you know, a lot of times like we're a product of our environments, but we don't
Yeah.
choose our environments, right? Like it's not like it's not like he chose to be raped. It's not like he chose to like go to this like shit education system that didn't give a fuck about him. You know, maybe he
Yeah.
didn't know any better, and you know, it's like we learn from like behaviors that have like been done unto us, and you know, it's just a shame.
I think, yeah. I think we've probably talked about this in the past about he always recommends that book Ordinary Men, which is a really good book about how you can come, you can get to that end. So I think he does have a
Is that
really
about the
good
Nazis?
understanding of yeah, Ordinary Men is by I believe Christopher Browning, and it's about the police
Yeah,
unit
yeah.
in Poland, I believe. And it's one of those nice ones that I think Jocko did a podcast on it too, where it just describes like, you know, this guy was like a trucker and this guy was like a banker or whatever. They're all like these normal guys who just got enlisted to fight in the war effort, and they're not like evil guys. They're just normal people, and how your environment can kind of shape how you get to there. I think the same as when you look into like My Lai or um, I'm blanking on the prison. It was in like Iraq, I think. It wasn't that long. It was like only like a decade or so ago where we were in Iraq or something, and it was same idea where just these like normal prison guards from like normal, you know, like classic Midwest families turn out and do horrible things in the end just because of their environment. And I think the goal Jordan Peterson's trying to set forth is like, yeah, you've even if you've been dealt a shit hand, here's kind of the path back out of it to kind of set your world in order, or else you will go down this dark path, which I think we've also mentioned this in the past. Jordan Peterson does a really good job with his self-authoring or in his speeches of being like, here's like the absolute worst case scenario you can find and how you're on that path already, and here's how to try and get off that path towards this worst case.
The great thing too that he sort of touches on in this chapter as well is that like well it does make sense for how like some of these human beings come to making like these wild decisions, is that like more often than not it's also the case that people don't continue to like enact the violence that was shown upon them too, right? Because later in this chapter he's
Mm,
also like I don't even remember exactly where it was, but he's like a lot of time like if this were the case, then the world would like the world wouldn't exist, you know, because
yeah,
I mean there's if I think he used like this sort of like mathematical example where it's like if one parent like committed abuse to their child and then that child had a child, um,
mm,
and then was
yeah.
abusive
I think it
towards
was
them
like,
too, like you would have like
yeah,
you would have like somewhere on the order of like 10 billion people in the world that are just enacting abuse, and that's number
yeah,
one more than the number of people that there are in the world. But it's also not the case that it's like that at all, right? Like I know plenty of like families that are like beautiful families, non-pathological, you know, they've never like raised a hand to their kids. Sure, they've had to discipline them, right? But it's not like, you know, you're like physically or sexually abusing them. But
Yeah.
I think that's like sort of that's like one of those diamonds in the rough, because I mean it does seem really grim, like up until that point. But he's also like, okay, as bad as it all is, it's not like the overwhelming majority of cases, right? This isn't always what happens, and sometimes like the buck that sometimes that's enough, right? Where like the buck just stops at like the level of one individual, where it's like
Yeah.
you reflect on you reflect on the violence or the abuse that was enacted upon you, and you're like, okay, it's wrong for me to do that to another human being too, because I know how that made me feel. It made me feel like shit. It made me feel like crap, and I wanted to like kill myself or whatever. It's like
Yeah.
what kind of world would I be bringing into existence if I were to perpetuate that sort of cycle of violence, or make someone else feel like suicidal or like a worthless human being if I were to do those things too. You know?
Yeah. I was gonna say I just saw it. I think it's in that same section you just mentioned where, it goes in. I know I can just read from the text. It's a bullied boy can mimic his tormentors, but he can also learn from his own abuse that it is wrong to push people around and make their lives miserable. Which I think that's some of the greatest stories is of that redemption. Yeah, if it's almost redemption stories where
Right.
someone goes through something terrible and comes back out of it either better or withstands it, you know.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I'm trying to think of a good example where I think that's where I don't know if you've seen the show Invincible on Amazon,
I've seen clips of it
but
enough
like
for me to like
yeah,
understand the memes and get
yeah.
attached to the characters.
So like yeah, to not completely just spoil it, but like by the end, like the main character, his whole life is kind of flipped upside down, and he gets like just the absolute shit beat out of him for episodes upon episodes. It's a pretty dark show when it gets down to it, but I think in the end, he kind of comes out the other end, and he's still realizes like, oh no, like humanity is still worth fighting for. I am still gonna stand up to evil. And I think those are some of like the greatest stories where you go through like the absolute worst. Like think of like Lord of the Rings or uh, even like real life stories like that defector from North Korea. Like all these stories where people come out the other end and they're not like terrible people. They're actually really amazing, great people, and they improved. Or if you another good example would be like Nelson Mandela. He was unjustly imprisoned for years, and he comes out. And I think I was listening to a podcast just about it this week about how he comes out of it, and everyone was expecting him to basically be kind of like who's who's the guy Martin Luther King's kind of adversary. You
Malcolm
know what I'm
X.
talking about? Yeah, kind of be like a Malcolm X type figure, and he could set South Africa ablaze, but rather he goes kind of the Gandhi peaceful route rather than
Mm.
the violent revolution route, if that makes
Yeah,
sense.
yeah, and the cool thing about that is that like I think we've definitely mentioned this before, but it's almost like the idea of the hero's journey too. Like
Mm,
sort of the call to adventure is like in this case the call to being to living a life that's greater than the abuse that you've suffered. You know, and
yeah,
one of the things that I really liked about this chapter too is that like almost everything he says is like substantiated by like either a literary work or like just just like a figure in history. So he
hmm
mentions like this play called The Cocktail Party by T.S. Eliot, and this is like this is like Jocko Willink before Jocko Willink, but it was like this idea where this one of the characters is like super unhappy, and then she
yeah,
just chalked up all of like her suffering to like her fault, you know? Because I mean, what else can you do? And that was the conclusion that she came to too, where it's like, okay, if all the misery in my life is because of me, then I can actually do something about that, right? Like I can accept the
mm,
responsibility for the way that my life is right now and moving forward, or I could just be like, oh, woe is me, the universe is shitting on me, and there's nothing I can do about it anyways. And if there's nothing I can do about it, then why not just burn everything down, right?
Hmm.
So it's like
Yeah.
the extreme poles of that argument is, oh, I'll either burn everything down, or everything that I do is meaningful, and I can take responsibility for everything. And
Hmm.
that's exactly what Jocko talks about too, where it's like that idea of extreme ownership, where somehow, like some way or another, you had a hand in almost all of the outcomes that like were beset before you too. And that's even something he talks about in this chapter. Like even in the next paragraphs, I just love so much how like this chapter is organized. I think this is sort of like where he really hits his stride. It's almost like the climax, because he talks about like subsequently how Solzhenitsyn was
Hmm.
eventually like imprisoned in one of like the gulags, but he was also like after a period of time he was also thinking to himself like, what is it that I did to like help bring this into fruition? Oh, I was blindly loyal to the Soviet Union. And then like I think he spent some time like as a soldier too in the army. And then
Yeah.
just he blindly supported like a political ideology that couldn't comprehend like what the ultimate conclusion was. So it's like as much
Hmm.
as we'd love to blame like Stalin or like Marxism, it was all the little people that were complicit along the way. And I
Yeah.
just absolutely love that, because I mean it's true in America right now too, where it's like people think, oh, Donald Trump is the product of like suppressed racism or whatever, and it's like
Yeah.
I don't think I don't think that's like a sophisticated enough answer. It's like
Yeah.
maybe it's the result of like the middle class just being like shit on for so long, and then this is just like the only way it's coming out, and then obviously like the media will do what they will in terms of like portraying people a certain way or like trying to push a certain narrative. But I think it's incredibly foolish for people to just be like, oh, this is just a bunch of like this is just like a handful of individuals that are just evil, and they're like racist or any sexist or any one of those like labels that you can throw on.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. I was just thinking, yeah, most people have that one univariate. And I actually made a note talking about Jocko, how I did a lot of driving this week, and a little bit I will listen to an old like Tim Ferriss Q&A from him where and it reminded me of this chapter immediately because some guy was like, "Oh, what do you have advice for like military stuff or and for the like BS system that you kind of get stuck in?" And he was like, "Oh yeah, like right along the lines of this chapter was so you can start small, like just do the work, do all the little things as you go along, and eventually you'll start to be able to change the system itself. So you have to get little by little, like fill all those little stupid forms and all the little things you have to do and do all the push-ups and the making your bed or whatever, and then you can actually start improving as you go rather than, I feel like I derailed your
No,
train of
you're good,
thought,
man.
but
I definitely feel you there. I think,
yeah, yeah.
and it's also something that he talks about in this chapter too. It's literally the next part where it's like things fall
Yeah.
apart. Like
Hmm.
left to themselves, things will go from bad to worse, right? And I mean,
Yeah.
even like just if anyone's ever tried to follow like a workout plan,
Yeah.
it's like you can realize that in an instant how true that is. It doesn't matter like I mean I struggled with this a lot too over this past year because I was dealing with an injury, but it's like
Hmm.
that injury took me out for like so long. Like sure I could have like done exercises that didn't involve like the part of my body that I had injured, to like sort of
Hmm.
keep up on things. But I mean I was just so I don't know, I was just feeling really sorry for myself, and I was like, man, it's like just too painful to manage right now. I'll get back in shape. Like how hard could it be? I've done it
Hmm.
like hundreds of times before. Like how will this time be any different, dude? Like all of the like any progress I had made in over like the last 1 or 2 years were like instantly gone in like a matter of months. Not even
Yeah.
months, like weeks. And it's kind of embarrassing and kind of humbling in some ways too, because I was like, oh my god, like what does all this mean if I have to train so hard and like push my body to its limit, like so many times a week for months on end, for years on end, for it to all just be taken away from me in like it doesn't even have to be in like weeks. Like it could be taken away from me in days. Like who knows what could happen in the next day. It's like what's the point in trying? Like if it's all gonna like
Yeah.
fade away. And I think that's like one of the scariest things to like come to existence too, or one of the scariest things to like enter your mind, because like once you start like entertaining those thoughts, you're like, dang, like, wow, it's all kind of pointless. I might as well just throw it all away, or I
Yeah.
might as well just end it. But we know here from not just here but also like from life experience, like that's not the right answer. One of the best things I've ever heard Jordan say is that like the meaning of life is to give life meaning. And I was like, oh my god, like
Mm.
that's so true. Because what's the like you when you hear something like as tremendous as that, I feel like you always have to ask like the natural question is, well, what's the alternative, right? The alternative is nothing that you do matters, and you might as well kill yourself, right?
Yeah.
And it's like if you do that, then if everyone did that, there would literally never be any humans. Life wouldn't exist.
Yeah.
Um, but
Yeah. I
yeah,
was just thinking like almost like my as a child was almost a metaphor for that, like doing things every day or it slowly gets messy, even as kind of more of an adult. But I remember as a kid, what would happen would I would clean my room, like make it as clean and as neat as possible. And then just slowly, as weeks went by, you don't fold that sh one shirt and just shove it back in, or, you don't quite put like that toy back in your cupboard like it should be, or something like that. And eventually, you would have to, every few months, I remember having to do this because I didn't stick with those little things every day, was I would have to basically tear my whole room apart and kind of start over
yeah.
because you didn't do all the little things as you go. So I just had this like massive mess in my room to clean up, and it would take hours. Where if I realized like, oh, if I had spent like a few seconds every day just like folding shirts or putting
Yeah.
something back the right way it was. It's all these little things. And I was also going to say, I felt like what you said was really going back to that compare yourself to who you were yesterday and not today. I think a lot of the things is people get overwhelmed and they're not just kind of almost living in the moment, kind of like what we talked about there, where there's this like true philosophy that every day you need to live in the moment and not focus on the future as much, where you just need to do those little things every day and keep improving and improving, where if you just keep thinking, it's kind of this weird balance where you need to keep thinking small term and doing the little things,
Mm.
where rather than always shooting for the future, which I think, if I remember right, he said, I think Jordan, this was another Jordan Peterson thing where he said you always overestimate what you can do in a long period of time, and or no, you always overestimate what you can do in a short period of time, but not a long period of time. Um,
Mm.
Maybe I flipped that in my head. Maybe that's not as, but I remember because he would say you could always be shocked if you do, because I think we're kind of hitting that last clean up your life section, the very last one, where, if you do the little things, you'd be surprised of how much you can get done in a week if you just do all the little things as you go. You might not hit everything every day, but if you keep doing it, you will be amazed at what you accomplish. And I think that was even like last chapter too, where was it last chapter or maybe it was that same chapter where he's like, yeah, if you keep making these little progressive changes, you're gonna be in a whole new world really soon, and
Mm.
it'll kind of get you out. And I think that's another way this book is so well organized, where it kind of harkens back to a new rule. And I keep thinking, I'm guessing the next rule when I reread it is going to be, if I keep in mind this last rule,
I see.
we've kind of descended into this is the worst case destruction, like everything's ruined, death, destruction, kill yourself, all that kind of stuff in this chapter, where I think the next chapter is like, oh, like I don't want to go down that route. He kind of alluded to what I should be doing, but like, where do I aim?
Mm.
Where do I go back and where do I aim again? It's like, okay, so what do I do? What little things should I be working towards is almost the next one.
Yeah, I think, and this is kind of crazy because I find that this is also something that happens too whenever you're having any sort of argument or conversation with someone. Like, you have to establish the premise, and then everyone has to agree on sort of the premise and also like the nature or like the boundaries of the conversation before the dank shit like starts to unfold, right? So when it comes to something like this, or when it comes to like setting your life in order, when you say sometimes you want to focus on just like the small things and be in the present rather than just constantly questioning, oh, is this going to take me to like the next level of my life, right? Like, I think he mentions this in his new book. I've only heard him talk about like this in his new book, but he's like, you want to aim at one thing and then just like focus solely on that, right? And then I think when it comes to what you're talking about, it's like you want to establish what exactly, like you want to set a goal for yourself initially, right? And then from there you want to you want to pick out, oh, what is like a reasonable plan that I can accomplish within X amount of time to like achieve this goal. And then once you do that, you just forget about everything else, and then you're just in the trenches day in day out, right? I mean, that's not to say that you won't ever question yourself, right? But I think there's a lot of truth and a lot of value in just being able to set a goal for yourself and then not constantly questioning yourself when it comes to like, is this going to take me to the next level of my life? I mean, you look at any sort of conversation surrounding like flat earth or whatever, right? Yeah. It's like if we were to constantly ask about like in any sort of science class, it's like, like how do we know that earth isn't flat, or how do we know that like the mitochondria is like the powerhouse of the cell, right? If we keep introducing like those the basic premise that we've already accepted like on a grand scale, we'd never get anything done, you know? Yeah. And he also mentions this too. This is going to come straight back to the thing that you mentioned too, where it's like you want to, I think he says, you want to trust in like the knowledge of your ancestors. Don't waste time questioning how you know that what you're doing is wrong if you're certain that it is. Inopportune questioning can confuse without enlightening, as well as deflecting you from action. Like, I love that so much, dude. But that's because, like, I do that a lot, you know? Yeah. Like, I'm in that same boat as you, man. Like, I'll have, like, 6 or, like, 20 tabs open on YouTube about, like, these different things. Or it's, like, maybe it's about, like, getting better at a video game, or learning this new lift, or questioning the meaning of life, or, like, some new conspiracy theory. You know, it's like, all these, like, things that definitely, like, captivate my interest. But like in the long term, they serve me no good because they keep me from action, you know? And it's like, do I really need to know exactly how this thing works? No, you know? Like, I don't need to I don't need to know like how a pencil is made for me to use the pencil. Right?
The same way as like you don't need to know like all the minutia of economics to actually run a small business, you know? Exactly. It's like if you just put in the work, which I think it's kind of going back to that idea where, you know, obviously the rule is set your life in perfect order. So you have to like get all the small things and we've definitely talked about this at least once or twice, where you have to kind of master the hierarchy first before you can even change it. So you have to you kind of have to play the game to change the game. It's like, imagine if you were like little league soccer, like like a second grader little league soccer player, and trying to question the rules of soccer, you know, like trying to question offsides or whatever. And then, you know, you kind of have to play the game to realize like, oh, there's like reasons for all these rules. And once you master it, then you can say like, oh, like we should tweak this rule because there's something wrong with the game. Or, you know, I think get to that mastery.
I think that's that's sort of the weird conjugate to that, because in that sense, it's almost like you have to understand why the rule exists for you to even be able to like acknowledge the validity, or even like if it's possible to change the rule too. Because I mean, otherwise you just look like a salty bastard, you know? Like sort of going back into like the rules of soccer. It's like, oh, I got I got a yellow card for this or whatever. I got a red card for that, and it's like. And you're saying like, oh, the rules should be changed. Like, well, that just puts a bad taste in the mouth, right? Because it's like, if it's one thing for like, if you look like, if you say, I don't know what like what like a good example for that is in soccer, maybe like a really like a really estimable like athlete that plays by the rules, you know, and they come out and say, oh, like like this very specific instance of like behavior or action warranting a red card is like not healthy for the game. It's like, okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
But if you look at like someone who's who's like kicking people all the time, or like they're shoving them, not even going for the ball, they're just playing for the body, and they're just, you know, putting people like in the hospital, saying like, oh, the rules should be changed. It's like, bro, you're just saying that so you can hurt more people, you know, or you can play the game that you want. You know, they're not they're doing it for selfish reasons and not doing it for like the right reason.
Yeah.
You know, and I also I also sort of like oh god, there's something that he mentioned too earlier. I don't even remember if I'll be able to pull it up too, but it's like it's sort of like the difference between revenge and justice, you know. And for me, it's like there's this quote from like Batman Begins. I think we were talking about this too when it comes to in reference to like the cocktail party too, where it's like it's either the world's fault or it's your fault, right?
Yeah.
And when it comes to like an issue of say revenge versus justice, it's like, I think in Batman Begins, Rachel's like, oh fuck, what did she say? She's like, revenge is good for yourself, but justice is good for the community, right?
Yeah. I think I keep meaning to, and this might be a little tangent, but I keep meaning to rewatch this video where I think I've watched two videos now I've seen from people I follow that are kind of this identification with villains, you know? Like one of them was like breaking down psychology papers and stuff where it was like, why do we enjoy good villains? And then the other one's like, why is there this weird trend of people identifying with villains? And I think it's because a lot of people are now in that mindset of wanting to break down the system, and it actually is really cathartic and it feels really good to kind of stick it to the man and not follow the rules, you know. And I think that's why, because like his examples is like, oh, like why does everyone really like Harley Quinn all of a sudden, or you know, why are we
Because
getting
Margot Robbie's
like,
hot, man. Let's be honest.
I mean, I yeah, but it's like why are all these people like liking Harley Quinn all of a sudden, and why are we all enjoying um all these like anti-heroes or kind of
Yeah.
villains that are kind of doing good? And it's like kind of this thing where it's like you don't want to do all the hard work of being a hero and living up to the ideals and kind of just want to tear down the system again.
I think that makes a lot of sense. Because, like, even... I'm going to reference, like, the Batman Begins again, just because I love that movie. But it's like, that happens to Bruce Wayne, too, at the beginning, right? Because his parents are killed before his eyes by a criminal, like a no-name criminal, right? Joe Chill. And he comes back after, like, spending a long time away from college, to like the trial of the murder of his parents, and he goes into like an encounter with that man with like the intent to kill him with a gun, right? And it's like there's like an alternative reality where that actually happened. I say alternative reality like like Batman itself isn't like a reality, but like there's a storyline there where he actually does do that and he becomes a villain, right? And you think to yourself, like, if I saw my parents get shot by, like, this fucking scumbag, right? Like, I'd probably want to kill him, too. Like, no matter how much time has passed. And then, like, that entire conversation that he has with Rachel, like, in the car, talking about, like, the meaning of justice and revenge and what it means to be, like, a good person, too. You know? Like, that's, like, that, like, first half of the film is almost in and of itself, like, an appeal to that sort of anti-hero mentality. Because he didn't choose to have that stuff happen to him, right? It just was like an unfortunate event that befell him, and this was just the logical conclusion that he came to, right? And it was only because he had like a role model, or he had a friend, or I think in the movie he was like even denied the opportunity to kill him because someone else killed him before he could kill him. You know, that in and of itself is almost like one of those self-contained things, and that's sort of one of the reasons why, like, I think even Batman is like such a like beloved character too, because I mean we've accepted that he's not like this moral symbol of justice, right? Or I think that's what he tries to be with the Batman, but like deep down he's still a human being, right? He's still a person, and he still has emotions, and he still seeks revenge too, and I think I think just the existence of like those anti-heroes that you're talking about, like these people like Harley Quinn or I can't think of other examples off the top of my head.
I think his big example was for a while there was like a meme of it was like the new guy meme, and there was like this comic, and this artist does it a lot if you look through her things where her character is kind of like downtrodden a little bit, but like her responses is always revenge, or like the one he mentioned is the new guy's at work and she's on her phone, and she's the comic is it's kind of implying that it's PewDiePie when he got robbed or something, and she's like, look at this millionaire got robbed, and like the new guy is like this nice, like he looks kind of dopey and he's bald, and he's like, oh, how would you like it if he got robbed, or if you got robbed? And she's like, oh, I don't think we're gonna be friends. And he's like so sad about it. And it's like, yeah, why is it like that the asshole is that's laughing at someone else's misfortune and then being a dick to the new guy is like the hero of this comic. It's and he's pointing out it's like it's because it is cathartic to not be that hero and kind of want to tear down that system.
Well, I mean, look at a character like Superman too.
Mm,
No one is him, right? No one's like as
yeah.
selfless. Like it's just not realistic, right? Because I mean, we're human beings, and we don't just have experience like positive emotion too, and have this sense of like everlasting justice or like unshakable justice, right? Like I think that's one of the reasons why like we like those characters appeal to us so much, is because we see aspects of ourselves within them. That's one of the reasons why like uh, I think that the idea of the hero's journey is kind of like being pushed aside right now in favor of like more complex storytelling. Because I mean, there's always a place for that, right? Like you can write any story about like any superhero, and it's gonna make a lot of money, right? Just because that's like one of the oldest stories in the book that like is guaranteed to draw attention. But like the other thing too that I think we're just becoming more aware of, like in the West, is just our own capacity of being like, oh yeah, I'm a selfish bitch, or oh yeah, I'm pretty vengeful too. And there's been times where like I didn't want to be the bigger person, whatever the hell that means, and I just wanted to like stick it to whoever like did me wrong, and that feels good, but like it doesn't solve your problems, right? It doesn't undo the things in the past, and that's almost always like the theme that all these movies come to at the end, where it's like it's as good as it feels to like not be like a goody two shoes, it's still wrong for you to do bad shit, you know. Um, I think a story that sort of took that but took that idea but wanted like a different, darker direction is the Joker. like you see this guy going through a bunch of like just negativity or bad experiences, um, and then towards the end he just starts killing people for like no reason, or just because he wants to. And then
Yeah,
at the
yeah.
end he like gets away with it, um, and obviously it's like if everyone were to do that, we would just have tremendous chaos. There would be like vandalism everywhere. No one would get anything done. People would be
Yeah.
dying. Innocent people would be dying. It's just
Which
it's just not a tenable solution.
yeah,
But
which I think the moral of the Joker is that that's not what we want. Like it's kind of like how Peterson started this chapter where it was like here's all the crappy things that what was his name,
Panzram,
Panzram?
Carl Panzram.
Panzram? Yeah, it's basically like a Panzram type story where it's like look at this shitty character and like what he did, and like the end result is him just causing death and destruction. Like that's the moral of the story is here's like the wrong route and like a call to action for us to avoid that scenario, um,
Yeah.
rather than obviously the other story, which I can't think of a good example where it's like a character who went through a similar thing and became like a good person in the end.
Mm.
Um, but I
Yeah.
think we already kind of circled that where the best stories are the people who would go through a Joker type story, but rather than them turning into a Joker, became like a hero type
Well,
story.
maybe this isn't exactly like a one-to-one example, but look at Iron Man, or at least like the modern
Mm,
interpretation of Iron Man, where he gets like obviously he lives like this incredibly fabulous lifestyle. He's born into like a very wealthy family. He's an incredibly intelligent human being, but he's a weapons like manufacturer. He deals He works in a company that deals weapons under the table to both sides, and then he gets taken as a POW. He's tortured. He's like brutally like disfigured too, and has to like put this thing in his chest. But like he still is able to come out of that experience and reflect on how he had a hand in the thing, like the negative experiences that befell him, right? Where it's like, oh, I was I was a person that was like willing to do anything for money, even if it was like creating weapons that like destroyed like innocent lives or whatever. And I mean, at the time, he had like those cutesy ways of getting out of those arguments, or like making himself seem like not the bad guy, not a good guy by any means, but like just not the bad guy. Where he's like, what is that, like peace is like carrying a bigger stick than the other guy,
Yeah.
you know? And it's like that. I think that that's probably like one of the best and also most like popular characters out there right now too, especially within like the crazy Marvel universe right now, just because that's so popular. And also like, I mean, look at him now. He's the most popular. He's not just like the most popular character in like that franchise, but like just him as a personality too, like Robert Downey Jr. Like he went through
Yeah.
a lot of shit in his life too, right? Because he was a miscreant. He certainly didn't have like a clean record. He was a criminal. He did a lot of drugs, and his career was like revitalized in his like 40s or like late 30s. I can't remember.
Mm,
And Iron Man was like almost sort of like this Hail Mary. He had no idea what to expect, but now everyone loves him, right?
yeah.
And that's because that's because he's not like a. I mean, that's not to say people don't like people like Chris Evans or whatever that guy's name is.
Yeah.
But you know, it's like everyone likes a story. Everyone likes an underdog. Everyone likes the like a story of redemption too. But yeah, I think one of the things I really like too about this chapter is just that like he gives a lot of hope towards the end. He's
Mm,
like, okay, you can have all these like bad things happen to you, but don't blame capitalism, the radical left, or the inequity of your enemies. I love that so much because like he's kind of like shitting on both sides, and he's like
yeah.
appealing to he's sort of appealing to like the rebuttal arguments of each side, where it's like, oh, the right complains about lefties bitching about capitalism all the time, and then the left is always like talking about how the right just calls them like too woke of liberals, or like the radical left, you know. And
Yeah.
he's sort of like trying to portray this as neutral as possible. But I also like to bring this like full circle when it comes to just talking about like the idea of recognizing that chaos within yourself, and having like a cathartic, peaceful moment. He also touches upon that at the very end too, where he's like, perhaps you will discover that now your less corrupted soul, after like this reflection, much stronger than it might have otherwise have been, is now able to bear those remaining necessary, minimal, inescapable tragedies. That's like I think I can't remember if it's like the SEALs or the Marines that just say embrace the suck, right?
Mm,
It's like just accept that life
yeah.
is like pain and suffering, and that you will die. You know,
Yeah.
that sounds bad, but like when you accept that, I feel as though you can only recognize like you can only go up from there, right? Because now it's like whenever
Mm,
anything good happens to you, you're like, oh my god, like this is fabulous, right? Because I only expected bad things to happen to me, right? Like this world,
yeah.
in this world, we're only promised two things. It's like pain and suffering and death. Like
Yeah.
nothing else is promised. You're not promised like any happiness. You know, it's the complete serendipity if it does. And if it does, like it should be celebrated, you know? And it's also like
Mm,
you have to recognize the negative things for I used to always hate it when people say this. Where it's like you gotta recognize the bad for you to be able to accept the good. And I was like, whatever, shut the fuck up. You know? It just sounded so cheesy, but
yeah.
now it sort of like makes a little more sense too, especially when you're able to like pull examples not just throughout history, but you're able to like look in your own life and you're like, oh shit, like this is some stuff that I had to go through. It was pretty bad, but now I'm in a
Yeah.
better place right now because of those things.
Which I think that's part of that like core tenet of, like Buddhism or whatever. It's like that life is suffering. So it's like if you set up that idea that life's gonna suck, it can, like you said, it can only go up from there. I think if I remember right, like the quote that I got yesterday was, yeah, no. It's from Seneca. Was no man is more unhappy than who has never faced his adversity, for he is not permitted to prove himself. So it's like that idea of where it's
Mm.
like, even if you suffer, if you never suffered, you're never going to rise above something. So that's kind of like this chapter where it's like, yeah, you're gonna suffer, it's gonna suck. You're gonna go through dark stuff. I mean, look at these crazy examples of like terrible people, but they still kind of rose up. And I think that's why the next kind of chapter is going into like, okay, well, life does suck. We've gone down that dark route like we talked before, so like now we're looking up. We're making small changes, we're improving, we're getting down into it and getting to work. What do we aim at is like the next goal.
Yeah, I love that, and I think that's perfect. I think that's a perfect place to end. So yeah, I mean that's gonna be all from us right now. And then tune in next week when we're going to be talking about rule number 7: pursue what is meaningful, not what is expedient. All right, later, guys. Take care.
Yeah.